Let's talk about exactly why you should focus on outcomes and not outputs, and why this shift is not a nice to have. It's absolutely essential if you want to move further along in your career. Making the choice to focus on outcomes before outputs versus outputs before outcomes is going to be the difference that can make or break your career progression or your personal goals. And if you've ever felt like your hard work isn't translating into promotions or recognition, the problem might be that you're focusing on the wrong thing, and that's outputs. Now, don't get me wrong, outputs are important, but they're not more important than starting with outcomes. Both outputs and outcomes define a whole picture. Let's dive into what outputs mean. Outputs are tasks or deliverables you produce, like reports or projects. But remember, outputs are just the how. They're necessary, but they aren't the end goal. And now that you understand outputs, let's talk about why they're only part of the story. To really make an impact, you need to focus on outcomes. And here's why that's so important. Outcomes are the results of those outputs. It's the difference your work makes. For example, writing a report is an output, but the outcome is how the report influences decision-making or business growth. Think of it like this. The flow starts with an idea or an input, which leads to what we build. And these are outputs, like reports or products. But the real question is, what comes out of those outputs? And that's where we move from outputs to outcomes and impacts. Let's bring this into a personal context. Imagine for a minute you decide to adopt a healthier lifestyle. The outputs or actions could be regular exercise, eating nutritionally, getting enough sleep. These are the things you're actively doing to bring about a change. But just like in your career, those actions don't tell the complete story. The real change comes from what those actions lead to. Let's talk about outcomes. The outcome of your healthier habits may be losing 10 pounds or having more energy. These are measurable, immediate results, just like in business. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Those outcomes lead to longer, bigger term changes, impacts. And over time, the impact of those healthier habits might be increased motivation, improved well-being, or even better performance at work. It's not just about losing weight. It's about the broader impact on your life. And in your career, focusing on outcomes and not just outputs is what will set you apart. High performers, those are the ones that can demonstrate how their work creates real results for the business. You must always start with the end in mind and work backwards from there. So if you start with outcomes, that will clearly identify for you what outputs are the essential things to work on to actually get to the outcomes that you want, rather than the other way around. Now that you know why outcomes matter so much, let's talk about the most common mistake that might be holding you back: focusing only on outputs. And here's why that's a trap you need to avoid. Focusing on outputs feels good because it's easy to measure: tasks completed, deadlines met. But if you're not tying your outputs to outcomes, you risk being seen as just an executor rather than a strategic thinker. And don't get me wrong, every business needs executors. And is that how you want to be seen, as just an executor, or do you also want to be seen as a strategic thinker? Before starting any task, ask yourself this: what is the outcome I want to achieve? This will keep you focused on the bigger picture. And if it's at work, what is the outcome the business is trying to achieve? Then you can get into how to get there, which again is the outputs. But start with that. Once you start asking why, your next step is to measure whether your work is leading to the desired outcome. Therefore, how do we track outcomes and not just outputs? When you discuss your work, always talk about the outcomes it delivered. For example, instead of saying, "I created a report," highlight how that report influenced a major decision or a project. And by the way, this is especially important, not just in the workplace, but if you are updating your resume shouldn't be a list of tasks that you've done, but outcomes you've achieved. It's essential that in every part, in every aspect of your life, that you focus first on outcomes and then you figure out the outputs for it. Otherwise, you might find yourself doing a lot of work and not seeing the results because you haven't thought about where you're headed. There's nothing like heading down the wrong path and spending several months on that path and having to backtrack and start again. If this video helped you rethink how you're focusing on outcomes, then check out this video next. Until next time, keep being brave and true to yourself. Bye.